Welcome everyone to Mayo Clinic Q&A. I'm Dr. Helena Gazelka. We're recording this podcast on December the 14th, 2020. And there is reason to be joyful today and to celebrate. With final approvals from the FDA and the CDC this past weekend, the first COVID-19 vaccines are being shipped within the US. Well, here to share an update with us is one of our favorite COVID experts, and certainly an expert in vaccines and virology, Dr. Gregory Poland, infectious disease expert from Mayo Clinic. Thanks for being here today, Greg.
Yes, my pleasure. It's fun to have good news.
Isn't it though? I was hoping that this will be really a rally cry. This is exciting stuff.
I got to tell you first, Helena, I attended the FDA meeting last Thursday, and I got the briefing book in advance. And I got to tell you, I mean, after being in the field of vaccines for almost 4 decades, I opened that up and my hands were trembling and I got choked up. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I thought I read it wrong, that the efficacy could be this high. We were expecting something half as good, and we would have been, happy with that as a first start. So this is a milestone human achievement by any measure. So what happened is the FDA advisory committee recommended that it be granted EUA. Over the weekend, FDA formally did that. Yesterday, vaccine doses started rolling out of the Pfizer distribution facilities. Today, every state and territory will get their allocation of vaccine. What happens next? Every state has the right to direct how that vaccine is going to be used. There has been overarching guidance given by the ACIP, which met yesterday, Sunday, first time that's ever happened. I sat on that committee through 2 terms. That has never happened before. And the recommendation is that the forward-facing healthcare workers, the people who are actually taking care of people on the COVID wards, that level of healthcare worker, and people in long-term care facilities be the first to get it. So how will that be implemented? As I said, each state has the opportunity to decide that for themselves. But in Minnesota, the decision has been that phase 1, when we have very limited doses, would be in the populations that I just mentioned. So it's going to go to Mayo Clinic and be distributed to other healthcare centers. Phase 2, those vaccines will be administered when we have more doses, and that will be distributed then to clinics, hospitals, pharmacies, et cetera. And then phase 3, when there's a large amount of vaccine available from this spring through summer, that plan will follow on from phase 2. So a lot of logistics here that still have to be handled.
Well, that is exciting news, Greg. And to hear that you are confident in this vaccine is, of course, very important to us. You are an expert in this area and have worked your entire career on vaccines and viruses. So multiple of my coworkers had asked me, should we be getting this vaccine? And I said, well, Dr. Poland says so, and I trust him.
Well, to tell you the absolute transparent truth, as soon as I am eligible, my sleeve goes up and I have no hesitation in getting that vaccine. Now, as a healthcare provider, I might get particularly my second dose on a Friday, because there are things like sore arm, low-grade fever, headache, etc., that last for a few hours to a day, something like that. Goes away by itself, doesn't require treatment. So I might do something like that. But other than that, no hesitation. These are robust data. We have more data on this vaccine than any vaccine that has ever been rolled out before.
You mentioned something interesting about the second dose, and which made me wonder about the logistics of, obviously, if you're having the first dose, you have to have the second dose available within a certain period of time, I imagine.
Yeah.
And so how do they hold back enough vaccine or make sure that there's enough for the people who had it the first time to get it the second time before we move on to other groups?
Well, that's a good question, Helena, and it's part of the sort of careful choreographed logistics that have to happen. There's a cold chain that has to be preserved, and then everybody who fits into that 1A group, it's called, you have to hold aside a second dose, because for the Pfizer vaccine, that will follow on in just 3 weeks. So you can't say, well, we'll give it and then hope that we get another supply to give the second dose. You're going to have to hold back that second dose for that first highest priority group.
You mentioned the timeline earlier about the sequence of who would be receiving the vaccine. And I'm curious, I work at Mayo Clinic, and so I know that I'm going to get an email or a message that I can schedule to have my vaccine when it is my turn. But how will individuals in the public and in the communities and our listeners know when it is their turn to get a vaccine, and that they can approach their healthcare facility about it and which place to go to?
Sure. They're gonna hear that, first of all, just through local and regional news in terms of vaccine availability and doses. And then they're gonna, of course, go somewhere to get it. And most logically, their healthcare provider, to a clinic or institution like Mayo Clinic for those that are in Southeast Minnesota, for example. And so their local physicians can tell them also when are they next in line. The thing that may be a little bit difficult is, we hear of people that say, well, I might want to wait and let others take it first and see that it's, quote, safe. Well, you may lose your place in line. And, you basically go back to the bottom of the line. So you're going to have to think through that. And I would encourage people to not make decisions based on theoretical fears, but make decisions based on what we know about the science, what we know the benefits and the risks are, and then look to trusted healthcare providers and healthcare institutions to take your lead.
And one of the things that we know, Greg, is that this Pfizer vaccine, which is first to go out, has been tested on over 40,000 individuals. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, almost 44,000 individuals. The only study I can think of that was ever bigger than that was the rotavirus vaccine, which got up in the 60, 70,000. But that's because of the lower incidence of disease. Normally, a vaccine would be tested on 10,000, maybe 12,000, something like that. Here we've got 44,000 from Pfizer, another 30,000 from Moderna. That's getting towards 75,000 people who got 150,000 doses, because you get 2 doses of it. And this is on balance, a safe and effective vaccine. Nothing's perfectly effective. Nothing in life is. This came as close as you can get, 95%. Nothing's perfectly safe, right? You're going to have a sore arm. You're going to have a low-grade fever. In all likelihood, those go away, and they're actually evidence that your body is mounting a really strong and effective immune response. So don't misinterpret the symptoms or signals that you're getting from your body when you get the vaccine.
And I think that 95% efficacy is far less than what I can often offer patients in terms of whether a medication will be helpful to them or a procedure. And I think that's pretty typical in healthcare. Yes. That's a pretty high number.
Oh, it's astounding, as I say, just astounding.
So, Greg, I heard someone say that vaccines don't stop pandemics, vaccinations do. We've heard of this concept of herd immunity. A certain number of Americans are going to have to be vaccinated before we can see this herd immunity and see a decrement then in the spread of the virus. How long is it going to take to get there, and what are we looking for?
Yeah, what we really need is somewhere in the 70+% of the population to have gotten one of these vaccines in order to start approaching herd immunity. So let's assume that it's 90 to 95% effective. That means 5-10% of people who get the vaccine may not be fully protected. They may get some level of protection, but not full protection. So you're probably talking in the neighborhood of 70, maybe even 80% of the population that may have to get the vaccine before we reach that stage of herd immunity. When would that occur? Probably late summer of 2021, depending on the flow of vaccine doses. What that means is that we're still going to be wearing masks and practicing physical distancing and washing our hands until that point.
Greg, if you've had 2 doses of the vaccine, will you need to wear a mask anymore?
Yes. At this point, I would still encourage people to wear a mask because you don't know, are you the 90 or 95 out of 100 that are protected? Or are you the 5 to 10 out of 100 that didn't get protected or didn't get full protection? So yeah, I think you're going to have to wear a mask. The other important point of that is, remember, we don't have long-term durability data. So we don't know how long are you actually protected. Another reason for people to wear masks. Now, every week that goes by, we gather more data on that, right? We're well past 3 months now of data, and there's no decrement in protection over those 3 months. But for the time being, yes, got to wear a mask.
That makes sense, but I had wondered about that.
Yeah.
We hear about just other COVID-19 vaccines. Obviously, we've been focusing on Pfizer, and then there's secondary talk about Moderna, which is probably coming up next for approval. But how many of these are there? And will individuals, will our listeners have to choose what they get, or even have the possibility of choosing which one they receive?
Yeah, I think initially the answer to that will be no, driven purely by the limitation in the number of doses. So you're right, Helena, that this coming Thursday, the FDA Advisory Committee will now turn their attention to a second vaccine candidate, Moderna, also an mRNA vaccine, just like Pfizer. I have almost certainty that that will be approved for an EUA. And next week, we'll be talking about the Moderna vaccine. So there'll be 2 different vaccines that will be distributed. I suspect it won't be until deep into the spring and summer where there would be enough doses of multiple different vaccines that there would be the potential for choice.
Greg, I'm curious about children. So I believe that I've read that the Pfizer vaccine is only approved for age 16 and over. And so what about children? If we need herd immunity, do we have to immunize the children, and will there be a vaccine for them?
Yes, your thinking is exactly spot on, Helena. We're going to need to immunize children. The Pfizer vaccine is granted an EUA down to age 16. They're expanding their studies first to age 12. They see good safety and efficacy signal. They plan on expanding it down to age 5. The Moderna vaccine is likely to be approved starting at age 18, and then they'll march their way down. And same with each vaccine. So the general pathway of vaccine development, where we're all susceptible, not just a childhood disease, is that we start with adults, ensure safety and efficacy, learn about the vaccine, and then march those studies backwards to younger and younger people.
Any idea how long that will take before our children will be vaccinated?
In some ways, fortunate, in other ways, of course, unfortunately, with this horrific surge in cases, we're going to get those data sooner rather than later. So I suspect in that first quarter of 2021, by that March timeframe, we'll begin to have high-level data to show its safety and efficacy in those younger age groups.
Wonderful. Well, Greg, you know that one of my favorite parts of the program is when we do questions from the listener mailbag, and I have a couple of those for you today.
Okay, great.
The first one is from a listener who is wondering about COVID-19 and infertility. Is there an association between the disease or the infection and infertility, or the vaccine and infertility?
Yeah. Let me take first the vaccine. So there have been somewhere around 30 women who ended up getting vaccinated before they knew they were pregnant. And there's been no adverse effect thus far on those 30 women. Now, it's early for some of them. They haven't completed their pregnancy, but thus far, no evidence of ill effect. In the animal studies, there was no negative effect on fertility after getting the vaccine. Well, what about the disease? Well, we know that getting COVID infection in a man decrements spermatogenesis. So we know that sperm quality is harmed. in men who are infected with COVID. Now, they recover from that. There's no evidence of long-lasting side effects from that. But during that time period, and I can't tell you how far out, those studies really haven't been done yet, fertility is decreased. We don't have evidence of that in women, interestingly enough, at this point. So it appears to be a male issue. Where fertility is affected in women, and this is a hard one to quantitate, is stress. So we know that high levels of emotional distress decrement a woman's fertility. So you take both of those things, and there, yes, is an effect on fertility due to the virus, not due to the vaccine. The other thing, and I realize this isn't what you asked, but it's interesting, is that the number of births that has been occurring during this pandemic has plummeted. And that's more due to family planning, people uncertain about the future, their jobs, et cetera. So we're really coming out of this with a dearth of births, which of course is not good in a population.
That's really interesting, Greg. I hadn't heard that before, and I might have thought the opposite, given that we're going on 9 or 10 months of being stuck at home for a while.
Yeah.
Greg, there are a couple of other special populations who had questions for you about effectiveness of the vaccine or concerns with the vaccine. Some of those are people who may have diabetes or people who have significant allergies and use an EpiPen. Are there concerns about them receiving the vaccine?
Yeah, really good question. So first, let me take chronic medical conditions like diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, lung disease, et cetera. In every subgroup analysis, and this is amazing, we just don't see other vaccines with this kind of efficacy. This is truly amazing. The efficacy was for the most part the same across all those groups, even by age. Elderly people are the hardest ones to protect because their immune systems are not as strong or vigorous. And they were protected with essentially equal levels of protection. Again, this is astounding. Now, the area where there's concern, because they were excluded from the studies, is in people who are highly immunocompromised. Let's take somebody with an organ transplant, for example, or getting chemotherapy. We have no reason to suspect any safety signal, and we will immunize those people at the appropriate time. The concern is more that they won't develop a protective antibody level. I suspect they will, but when we measure it, it'll turn out to be, 30%, 50%, 60%, but not 95% is my guess.
And Greg, that would be because of the medications that they're on in some cases.
Right, it would be because their immune systems aren't working well. Now, the issue that you asked in the last part of your question is a really important one. What about allergies? So, as I say, across the roughly 75,000 people who have gotten 150,000 doses of vaccine, there was seen evidence of hypersensitivity reactions. Those reactions did not occur any more frequently in the vaccine arm of the study than in the placebo arm of the study. Now it gets released by EUA. What's made the news around the world are these two cases of people who were known to be highly allergic and to have anaphylactic reactions to foods, who carried EpiPens with them. Two of them did develop anaphylaxis. And this occurred within minutes to hours after getting the vaccine. The tendency is to assume that it was due to the vaccine. It might have been, it might not have been. One of the people, one of those two, had an anaphylactic reaction to cheesecake once. So, what was it? Was it something they ate before they came to get the vaccine? Was it something else in their environment? We don't know. So what's happening is that the FDA and the CDC is advising, discuss with your healthcare worker. And if you are going to get the vaccine, do so in a controlled medical setting. For example, for me, with no allergies, I would have no problems driving or walking through, rolling up my sleeve, getting my shot. If I were somebody that had had anaphylactic reactions to vaccines or other medications, I would want to do that in the clinic where they're ready to give me epinephrine. Would there be any possibility of side effect?
So Greg, sometimes those allergies are associated with a very specific food. There's an anesthetic drug, for instance, that we use very commonly, but it can't be used in people who are allergic to eggs.
Oh.
Are there any known food allergens?
Now I learned something.
that are contraindications to the vaccine?
Yeah, so we know what's in the vaccine. We know the ingredients in them. Both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine are the mRNA encased in a lipid membrane or a lipid particle that contains 4 different lipids. So certainly somebody who had had any kind of vaccine allergy, we would talk with them about that in order to determine could they safely get the vaccine. Egg allergy is not one of those. There is no egg, there is no antibiotic in either of the vaccines. In the Moderna vaccine, there are some preservatives which are not present in the Pfizer vaccine. But otherwise, they're pretty much identical.
Excellent. We touched on this just a little bit earlier where I asked you if I was still going to have to wear a mask after I had 2 doses of the vaccine, and you said yes. So what other safety protocols will we need to follow? And really importantly, how will we know when we can stop doing some of those things like distancing?
That last question is really probably the toughest question you've asked me over these months. And the reason for it is we don't know the duration of protection. And remember that things are not static. Things continue to change. What if the virus continues to mutate? What if it mutates in a way that lessens or increases the strength of the vaccine? So the answer to your question really is time will tell. So we need to get enough people immunized, follow them for a long enough period of time, sequence enough of the viruses to say, okay, we can sound the all clear alarm. And that's going to take an international effort and efforts in each state to understand that kind of transmission dynamics and what's happening, as I say, over time.
So until then, hands, face, and space, right?
Absolutely.
Any last things you'd like to share with our listeners today, Greg?
I'm just very thankful, Helena, to you and to Mayo Clinic for having provided this forum. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of emails from people very thankful for the information that we're providing, often asking a question which I'm happy to try to answer. And I'm really, really pleased that the level of effort that has taken place at Mayo Clinic and at many institutions around the world, and including vaccine manufacturers, has allowed us to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're headed there. And I would just urge people, you don't want to be the last casualty. Just hang on with hands, face, and space. Vaccines are coming. They're safe and effective. And I would urge you, when it's your turn, get a vaccine. I know that I will and my family will.
I have to agree with that, Greg. I think there's been so much about this pandemic, and even facts have been distorted politically, etc.
Yeah.
And so it's wonderful to be able to come to an authority and to know that we are providing fact-based information as much as we are able to do so.
Yes, indeed.
Evidence-based medicine.
Yep, that's what we strive for.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Greg.
My pleasure. Be safe.
Our thanks to Mayo Clinic virologist, vaccine expert, and infectious disease expert, Dr. Greg Poland, for being with us again today. I hope that you learned something. I know that I did. We wish each of you a wonderful day.
Mayo Clinic Q&A is a production of the Mayo Clinic News Network and is available wherever you get and subscribe to your favorite podcasts. To see a list of all Mayo Clinic podcasts, visit newsnetwork.mayoclinic.org. Then click on podcasts. Thanks for listening, and be well.